Christmas is under attack. Not from the clerk at the register who had the nerve to wish me a happy holiday instead of a Merry Christmas. Let's be honest. If you work in retail in the weeks leading up to Christmas and you still have the ability to work up a smile and say anything remotely nice, you're a saint. 10 minutes in a store in mid-December and I'm ready to throw down with Santa Claus himself. I can't imagine dealing with it for 8 hours. But no, Christmas was under attack by a group of Christian religious fanatics known as Puritans. Yep, those same people who settled in Plymouth and wore hats with buckles. Between witch hunts, would decide Christmas had to go. It's 1647. The Puritans have come to power and put a target on anything that could possibly bring a little fun into your plague-ravaged life. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays from a special history is criminal. It being the Christmas season, I figured it'd be a good time to break away from some of the murder and mayhem and instead take a look at a time when Christmas was really under attack. The Puritan War on Christmas. Christmas comes with great stories and traditions, some jolly, some less so. Krampus, Black Peter, the Yule Cat, and more modern, like the Grinch and festive Starbucks cups. But if a group of religious zealots had their way, none of that would be part of our annual festivals. In fact, we wouldn't have any annual festivals at all. These Grinches came to power in England during the turbulent years of the 1600s, briefly setting aside the Stuart dynasty. The late 15 and early 1600s saw massive confusion and upheaval in the English government and religion. For these folks, separation of church and state normally meant the separation of someone's head from their bodies. The Protestant Revolution raged across Northern Europe, but good King Henry VIII was set to defend the Pope. Well, until he wasn't. Having issues with the Pope, seeking a divorce in search of a younger model, and not wanting to share power with the church, Henry decided it was time to leave the church and his wife. And one man would help him do both. Thomas Cromwell had aided Henry VIII in his break from the Roman Catholic Church and was instrumental in the downfall of Anne Boleyn. As Harry worked his way through wives, Cromwell would find a way to always be in the right place at the right time. His family would benefit personally from the seizure of monastic lands. Later, his offspring would come out on the right side of the conflict between Henry's children, with Robert Cromwell serving Elizabeth I. Now, how Elizabeth felt with one of her closest advisors coming from the same family that helped lead to her mother having her head chopped off, I don't know. But as England's OG Iron Lady, Elizabeth would defend her throne from all threats on every front. Foreign powers, religious radicals, even members of her own family wanted to remove her from power. Refusing to marry and having no children, at least that she knew of, England would have to look elsewhere for a monarch. When she died with no heirs, the throne passed to her cousin, James VI of Scotland, at which time he also became known as James I of England. We'll just ignore the fact that Elizabeth had his mother jailed for decades and then killed to keep the throne from passing to the Stuarts. Not sure if this is irony or just coincidence, but he would start the Stuart dynasty. His reign had its issues, most notably the Gunpowder Plot of 1605, the attempted assassination of the king and the whole government of England by Catholic radicals. Once again, it seemed people got a little overly excited about religious difference. James would survive the plot to rule another 20 years. When he died in 1625 from a stroke, his son Charles would become Charles I. A firm believer in the divine right of kings, he would actually rule without a parliament for 11 years. But it seems that actually ruling a nation required a little more than just Charles shouting out edicts while believing himself to be God's personal emissary on earth. The lords were not really happy with a monarch who was going to totally cut them out of decision-making, so he had to call Parliament back into session. Once Parliament returned, the king and Parliament found themselves constantly in conflict. At the same time, Oliver Cromwell was making a name for himself as a fiery 30-something-year-old parliamentarian. Cromwell was a member of an exciting new religious group called Puritans, a religious sect that felt the Church of England had failed to move itself far enough away from the trappings and rituals of Catholicism. So they wanted to purify the church, hence the clever name Puritans. The Puritans and other Protestants had taken issue with Charles' Catholic like resolutions, with some even claiming that Charles was a secret Catholic, a serious accusation at the time. Cromwell had even begun to criticize the bishops appointed by Charles. Of course, money played a major event in the rolls of the 1640s. Good old Charles wanted to raise money without parliamentary consent, a violation of the Magna Carta. His attempts to force a new prayer book on Scotland caused the Scots to revolt, so more money had to be spent to bring Scotland under control. Both the people in Parliament had had enough of Charles and his attempts to ignore the legislative authority in order to simply take what he wanted. In the 1640s, just like today, one couldn't separate money from politics. Between the religious conflicts and the questions of monarchical power versus parliamentary power, England was plunged into a civil war. Cromwell, showing his family's knack for picking the winning side, would serve as a general in the parliamentary army, aka the Roundheads. Charles' forces would be known as Cavaliers. Think Cavaliers after LeBron left, or the 1981-82 Cavaliers that went 15-67. The King's army would prove just as inept. For Charles, this would be unbelievably bad. Defeated, the king would be jailed and tried for treason. Now, being charged with treason must have come as a real shock to Charles, who, as an absolute monarchist, would have viewed himself as the state, making it impossible for him to commit treason. After all, how can one betray the state if one is the state? The new ruling power disagreed with Charles' views, and it ended with Charles having his head removed. Then, the sources tell us, his head was dropped on the ground, with some witnesses collecting some of the royal blood with handkerchiefs. His head was then stitched back on his body, and the whole left on public display for a short time before being buried. To butcher the words of the great American philosopher Mel Brooks, it's not so good to be the king. The parliamentarians established a republic dominated by Puritan-controlled parliament. But much to everyone's surprise, it seems that this collection of politicians failed to create a functioning government. So it would be Oliver Cromwell who would take the reins of power in England, taking the title of Lord Protector of England, Scotland, and Ireland. In theory, this was a republic with a parliamentary supremacy. In reality, Cromwell ruled more as a theocratic military dictator. The Cromwell government would attempt to control every aspect of life, both public and private. As Puritan churches moved to remove all remnants of Catholicism from houses of worship, the government enacted morality laws aimed at people's personal lives, banning dancing, music, theater, gambling, and most religious festivals, including Christmas. So why would a group of fanatical Christians ban a celebration that's supposed to glorify the birth of Jesus? Puritans saw Christmas as both too Catholic and too pagan. They stated there was no biblical support for the celebration of Christmas, and Puritans didn't want to do anything that wasn't in the Bible. William Puritan, a well-known Puritan politician and thought leader, believed Christmas to be the worst of the festivals practiced by the Anglican and Catholic churches with, quote, amorous, mixed, voluptuous, unchristian, and I say not pagan dancing. He argued that if Muslims were to see a Christmas celebration, they would think Jesus to be a glutton, epicure, a wine bibber, a devil, a friend of publicans, and sinners. Not sure why he cared so much what Muslims thought about Christmas celebrations, but it was a major part of his argument. He would also point out the connection between Christmas and the pagan festival of Saturnalia, with the Bible giving no date for the birth of Jesus, some early church leaders thought it would be a good idea to place his birth near the winter solstice. This was a time when many pagan religions had festivals, so co opting the season seemed like a good recruiting tool. It seems Christians needed some holidays, Easter being the major Christian holiday at the time, just wasn't enough. So, December 25th it was. Many common folk had also come to resent the lavish and wild celebrations that the wealthy had come known for. Christmas of the late Elizabethan period was oftentimes more a wild party than the family centered event we often think of. More frat party and less Norman Rockwell. An Elizabethan Christmas typically lasted from the 25th of December to the 6th of January, the 12 days of Christmas, and included enough booze to sideline the Seventh Fleet. Mainly for the wealthy, it was a 12-day festival of gluttony, complete with plays and caroling, and let's not forget, wassailing. Originally a Norse tradition, it involves carrying a large cauldron of mulled cider while singing and dancing. The idea started as a way to wake apple trees and scare away evil spirits, but it seems to have turned into more a drunkenly going from home to home, like a pub crawl, but you take the pub with you. It was Scotland that would ban Christmas first. Scottish Presbyterians held many of the same views on Christmas as the Puritans did. So in 1640, the Scots put the stad, or stop, and I'm sure I mispronounced that, to any Yuletide celebrations or vacations. Much of the Scottish celebration was tied to the pagan Yuletide, a holdover from the Norse who had a tendency to invade a great deal in the 18th century. So, Christmas was locked into the winter solstice festival and had also been adopted by Romans as the date to celebrate the birth of Jesus. So, as a pagan slash Catholic festival, it was outlawed. This could be enforced with imprisonment. Scottish parliamentarians would help push the issue in England, so in 1647, Parliament banned Christmas as a religious festival in England. This ban would also cover the New England colonies in America. Markets were to remain open, people had to report to work, no games were to be played, and no celebrations had. A fine would be imposed on anyone caught violating the ban. Authorities entered churches and removed evergreen boughs that had been placed there as decoration. It was full on Grinch time, but the Who's weren't going to give up Christmas without a fight. If you think the English can get a little rowdy at a soccer game, this was like a bad call at the ELF championships times 10. Riots broke out in different cities. In Kent and Canterbury, men openly flaunted the law by playing football, or soccer as us Americans would call it. Then, in an act that would truly fly in the face of the Puritan work ethic, they refused to open the market. 10,000 men passed a resolution saying if they couldn't have their Christmas day, they would see the king back on his throne. This was going from a wild party to possible treason. It would have to be stopped. The ringleaders were rounded up and jailed, but twice a grand jury refused to bring charges. It seems, however, that the show of force did put a damper on things. There is little to no evidence of large-scale uprisings in the following years, but evidence does show that many people privately violated the mandate. Public celebrations all but disappeared, as it seems Christmas was in fact going to be a victim of the culture wars of the 1600s. In 1658, Oliver Cromwell died and his son Richard succeeded him. It would turn out that Richard lacked both his father's charisma and political will, unable to maintain control like his father. The people and Parliament soon called for a return to the monarchy. Charles II was returned to the throne with the restoration of the Stuart monarchy. Charles II, also known as the Merry Monarch, removed the ban on gambling, dancing, theater, and religious festivals, including Christmas, in 1660. Scotland would be a little slower to restore Christmas. While the outright ban seems to have been lifted in 1712, it was not until 1958 that Christmas was again a public holiday in Scotland. After 1660, Father Christmas was once again free to bring merriment, joy, and figgy pudding, whatever the hell that is, across England. So the next time someone tells you Christmas is under attack because of how a coffee cup is decorated or because someone wished you a happy holiday, remember neither Oliver Cromwell nor the Grinch could kill the spirit of Christmas. So don't sweat the decorations, gifts, and trappings because Christmas, like a runaway freight train, is going to come anyway. So enjoy as best you can. Merry Christmas and happy holidays, whatever holiday you like. From History is Criminal.